Good morning. This is Bobby from Homespun Home. How are you guys doing? Um, I've had a, a heaviness of heart um, over the last week and a half, I guess. And I'm really, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do this video at this point in time due to the fact that I wanted to make this video as professional and as transparent and as appropriate as possible. Um, on a negative note, we're all dealing with this quarantine virus, and there's varying things that are going on right now in our society that the pros and cons of opening up businesses and whatnot, and the blatant disregard that people are displaying regarding protecting themselves and others. But on the other hand, there are those out there that are displaying extremely aggressive behavior and not really conducting themselves in a I guess maybe a socially acceptable manner. They're just going off the deep end. And I recognize that there's a lot of stress going on in our world as a result of the virus, and everybody's handling it differently. You can tell there's a lot of stress in the air, but that is not what I want to talk about. I did a video, I think it was last year, and I was really, really sick at that time when I did the video. And the title of the video was, Am I Racist? And it is not coincidence, but it is relevant regarding the sad or tragic incident that occurred with a young man that was jogging and was pursued by the Caucasian father and son. They basically ran him down like he was prey and killed him for no other reason other than sheer speculation on their part. The whole situation was tragic. It was not handled on theirs, and the two people, the father and the son, they just went to extremes. And due to their lack of integrity and control, they just went off the deep end and put matters in their own hands and killed this young man who was jogging in the neighborhood. And of course, he being a man of color, they had some issues, I guess, in that neighborhood, and I guess they just lump every man of color in that neighborhood as a potential criminal, or as they labeled him as the one that may have been involved in some break-ins without questioning or chatting or talking with this guy first, being adult, being responsible, being mature. They just proved themselves to be so ignorant, and I know that a lot of people are outraged, not just people of color, but also Caucasian. It was really sad and very tragic. I have myself, as a by myself, I went into a fairly large home that was vacant and looked around just to see what was going on, with the thought that maybe my husband and I could pursue purchasing this huge house that was located in a town that we were attending church. But it dawned on me as I was exploring, my main concern was someone would be in there and would hurt me, being a female and also being by myself in an abandoned building. So I ended up not furthering my exploration, and I left But I did get a chance to really look into most of the house to see, what was going on. It was such a large house that there were several compartments that were actually separate apartments under one roof. But anyway, so I myself have explored a vacant facility, and the video showed this guy that was jogging, went into a home that was in the process of being built, and he wasn't even in there but just for a few minutes, if that. He didn't do anything wrong. Matter of fact, I would have done the same thing if I was interested to see the layout of the house, how it was coming along, and just looking around, just to see what was going on. A lot of people do stuff like that. It's not a big deal. It's not like the guy did anything wrong. But anyway, my whole point in this is to talk about racism. And I really, really, really wanted to dig deep into some historical factors as well as some present day factors. But I don't know, if I don't go ahead and present this, it's going to get out of control to the point where, too much is going to go on, and I'm going to end up getting lost in the maze of what my thoughts are here. And then this other issue with this gentleman, which people wonder why, or I should say the professionals who supposedly uphold the law, they wonder why people are scared to death of them. In the death of Mr. Floyd, because of an irresponsible person who was supposedly upholding the law, but he just went to the extreme. I know that when there are arrests made, whether it's Caucasian, black, white, Chinese, whatever, there are certain tactics that certain, guilty victims, so to speak, do, and they'll talk about, well, you're hurting me, or, or the handcuffs are too tight, or whatever. But this scenario was unacceptable. The actions of these policemen, the one that put his knee against the neck of this gentleman and snuffed out his life, was unacceptable. And those that were standing around that were his comrades are just as guilty. And I totally agree that, yeah, okay, so they were fired, but they also need to be convicted for murder because of what happened with Mr. Floyd. He could have been Oriental, he could have been white, he could have been any nationality, but what they did was wrong. And it's getting ridiculous. But what I wanted to discuss in bringing those two major incidences to the forefront, which may or may not have anything to do with what I'm going to talk about. But I wanted to talk about racism. I wanted to talk about prejudice. I want to talk about the inability to accept people of different cultural and racial backgrounds. And I did this before in that I discussed some of my history. I was born in Portland, Maine, and my father was in the Navy. And as far as I know, my father did not have one prejudice bone in his body. And I think that quite often when you're in the military and you rely on everyone to do their job, and if you're out in the ocean and you're doing your overseas thing, it is, you learn to live with different nationalities and different cultures of people who are in the military, and you learn to rely on them for your very lives. I mean, when you're at war or you're, in the military, you learn that your friend over here who might be a man of color is going to one day maybe save your life if you're out on the war front, or if you're out in the middle of the ocean somewhere. You don't see color, you don't see race. But being raised in North Kingstown, Rhode Island, I did not really mingle too often with people of color because they're just, in my school that I went to, there were maybe one or two people of color. I don't know why it was a scarcity, but I never, you know, in all honesty, made them distinctly above or different or unique because they were people of color. I just looked at them as another person or another kid or another student, you know. And my father, because of the military, had a lot of friends that were people of color that he hung out with and lived around, and you know, went to their homes. And I even accompanied my father many times, you know, when he went to go see friends. And my first experience with someone of color, even prior to my father and being in the Navy, and some of my memories of being in junior high and elementary school, whatever, when I was living in North Kingstown. The very, 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 very first friend that I remember, my first two memories that come to mind, other than, you know, maybe here and there as an infant, not as an infant, but, you know, as like a 3-year-old and 4-year-old, 5-year-old. I have a few scattered memories, but my first two very distinct memories had to do with my being in first grade. And my very first friend was a little girl of color. We were both in first grade, and I can remember walking down the hallway holding her hand, which little girls did that. And we were best friends. I mean, literally best friends. And back in the day, when I was little, I used to walk to school by myself as a 6-year-old. I would cross the road and everything all by myself. I don't know if it was just a safer environment back then, or if it was just, and when I mean safe from anybody. I mean, it was in Pennsylvania, or in Philadelphia, I think, in Philadelphia, when I went to school, kindergarten and first grade. And like I said, I didn't see her as someone of color. She was just my friend. She was my best friend. And like I said, we would hold hands, and I remember that, walking down the hall, holding hands and swinging our arms back and forth. And, you know, just never dawned on me that she was, you know, a black girl. She was my friend. And my second main memory is this same friend had a little grandmother who lived with them. And I went to this little girl's house, which I don't remember how I got there. I may have walked, I don't know. But I went into her little girl's bedroom, and her little grandmother was very elderly. And there was a set of bunk beds, and I think the grandmother slept on the bottom and the little girl slept on the top. They were taking care of this elderly grandmother rather than, you know, like putting her in a assisted living or something like that. And she was the first person to tell me about Jesus. And she was the first person to talk to me literally about the Lord. So that was one of my first two memories, and they involved people of color. And then later on, of course, we lived in Rhode Island, North Kingstown, and there was an interracial couple that lived across the street from us, and she was expecting a baby. He was black and she was white. And someone in the neighborhood shot their dog. And it was done out of spite. And I remember the black guy was in a band, and he they would practice, and the kids in the neighborhood we would go over there, and I remember sitting on the couch, and they had the band all set up, and the black guy sang that song Crimson and Clover. Absolutely beautiful. But what happened was they were persecuted because of the fact that they were an interracial couple, and like I said, their dog was killed. And I remember seeing the dog, you know, struggling to breathe on the ground, and she was crying, and he was holding her, and she was probably about 9 months pregnant. It was really sad, really, really sad. And it had nothing to do with the fact that they were an interracial couple and people didn't want them living there. You know, they were duplex houses, and we lived across the street. So it was one street with a bunch of duplex houses, and they lived right across the street from us. And I never had any issues. As far as I know, my mom, dad, nobody had issues in my family, but evidently other people did. They ended up moving away, which is what they needed to do, I guess, because, I mean, it's just disgusting how they were treated. And many years later, there was a People magazine that was published, and it had a story in there about this very same couple. But it was many years later, and the article had to do with their lives and how people interacted with them over the years. Their children were grown by then, and he talked about when he was in the band, he talked about when their dog was shot, and blah, blah, blah. So I knew it was that same couple. But, and I don't want to get like religiously fanatic here, but the Bible says that God is no respecter of persons. Okay? When God looks at us as human beings, we are all the same. He doesn't look at color. He doesn't look at culture. He doesn't look at race. He looks at the heart. And when I got saved, okay, when I got the Holy Ghost and I got saved, and I'm not trying to be a fanatic here, but I'm just sharing with you, I was raised to where I was not prejudiced, okay? I was not racially slurred or racially damaged or racially inclined, you know, and even more so when I got saved, it never occurred to me to look at color. Actually, to be honest with you, I really love the culture that people of color have. But in saying that, I remember back in the day, going back to my childhood again, I remember we had to do some reports. I think I was in 6th grade or 5th grade or something like that. And I think the very first time that literally my heart was like almost broken and touched, where I felt that tweak. You know how sometimes you'll read something or see something and your heart gets like tweaked and you just want to cry. Well, I had to do a report on George Washington Carver, and I really had a lot of issues going on at home. And so I remember I was delayed in doing my report, and I was one of the last in the class to do my report because I just wasn't either responsible enough or I wasn't focused enough due to everything going on in my life. I had other more important matters than writing a, book report to deal with, but when you're in school, when you're in elementary or, whatever, teachers don't realize sometimes that students are dealing with issues far heavier than schoolwork, But that reflected on my grades, and so I was never an A student or, B student. I was just average. But anyway, I'll never forget my teacher came up to me, and it kind of opened up my eyes a little bit, and that really wasn't the reason I didn't do the book report. But I remember she came to me and she was, Bobby, your book report's due. It's overdue. You need to do it. You need to do it. And I got this George Washington Carver, and other students in the class got different names and stuff that they had to do a report on. And I didn't even realize that George Washington Carver was a man of color. I just didn't. So I'll never forget, she come up to me and very quietly asked me, she said, Bobby, are you not doing this report because this man is, I don't know that they called them black back then, but she referenced to his color. Is that why I wasn't doing the report? Maybe I was prejudiced, or maybe there was an issue with that. And I remember I looked at her in dismay, and all of a sudden I was enlightened, and I was like, what? No, that's not why I haven't turned in my report. Well, I went to my history book and I started reading on George Washington Carver. And in the story, it talked about his mother trying to escape, and she came up on a pond or a lake or something to that effect. And George Washington Carver was a very, very young infant. So, in order to escape, she had no choice, and it was in the dead of winter, but to scale into that water, freezing cold, and plunge through with this tiny infant in her arms to escape the authorities, trying to get away from the slavery. And I remember when I read that, my heart just, I was like, oh my God, you know. And then I read further that due to the fact that she had to go through this icy cold lake or pond or whatever it was, George Washington Carver got pneumonia. And the history book mentions she used some kind of fatty something to put on his little chest to help him, because I guess he developed like a bronchitis type cough or something. I don't know. But he pulled through. And then later on, of course, he experimented with things and brought a lot of things to our society as a scientist that was very beneficial. And I remember how impressed I was, how you know, the sorrow of trying to escape slavery, you know, him being sick, and then coming out, you know, ahead and la-di-da-di-da. And I was just like, yay, you know. And I remember I read my report. We were outside, it was in the spring, and all of the kids were sitting under the tree. And I was a very good writer as a kid. And so I took the story and put it in my own words and read the story. And I remember how encaptured everybody was under the tree, looking at me, because I put so much emotion into the story, because I was touched. But I had no clue. I had no clue any of this until I actually sat down and did the report, you know. And so his being a man of color had nothing to do with my delay. I was actually impressed. And it just seemed like from that point on, I always had this eager interest in the history of black people. So, got in church, and one of the things that I read, and I'm not saying it's historically accurate 100%, but the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. I never cried so hard over a book in my life. And the book is a little bit difficult to read sometimes because of the way it was written, but I'm telling you, that story just permeated my heart. And I was very much in church, very much a Christian, and, you know, very sensitive. And I just, oh my goodness, I was like, where have I been all my life? I read this book and I cried and I laughed and I cried and I cried and I laughed. It was the most touching story I ever read. And, you know, life went on. And I remember my husband and I were in a restaurant, southern region, because we live in the South, and we went to this little country restaurant. And there was a family of color sitting at the table, and they had a couple young kids, one of which was a little girl. And my husband and myself were there, and then there was a table with a bunch of rich Southern, you know, white men. I guess they got together for breakfast or whatever and chit-chatted and shoot the breeze or whatever. And I remember they had like a buffet breakfast, and the little girl went up there and she proceeded to help herself with some food items. And I saw this white man from that table go up to the little girl, and he was serving himself, and then he turned and said something to the little girl. And I know it wasn't anything positive, because the little girl turned with grief-stricken face and went to her dad, and I guess she relayed to him what the white guy said. And I could just read between the lines, you know. So I went up to that little girl, and I took her hand, and we went up to the buffet together. And I said just as loud as I could, honey, I said, don't you worry about those men over at that table. I said, you go ahead and fix your little plate. I said, there's just some people that are plain ignorant. And they heard me. And I wanted them to hear me. Because for one, no adult has the right to insult a child based on their race. I'm sorry, it's unacceptable. I'm not trying to be a hero. But my righteous indignation blew up in my face, and I was just like, I've got to say something. And the father of the little girl, you know, they were probably used to that kind of crap going on all the time, if you'll excuse the term. And his method was just, honey, just ignore it. They're just being, you know, he was very polite. He didn't go up there and confront. Well, I'm sorry, I'm a white girl, and I can get away with it. So I went up there and I made that little girl, I took her by the hand and led her up there, and I told her, don't you worry, baby. I said, those men over there are ignorant. I was beside myself. And she fixed her plate. And they didn't say one more word to that family or that child or to anybody over there, because that is unacceptable. I'm sorry. I thought that, you know, in society, I mean, come on. I know that racism and prejudice is something that is ingrained in certain people from childhood. But when you become an adult, you need to learn to make choices. And sometimes you have to deviate from the way you were raised in certain areas because it's wrong. And so anyway, and I don't even want to cry here because I just can't believe. So anyway, years have gone by and years have gone by, and my husband and I have had some really, really close friends that were people of color. And I worked with a girl for 3 years that was a girl of color, and I loved her dearly, but, you know, she had issues she was dealing with in her life, and she turned on me, but I still love her to this very day because that's just how I'm made. I just can't, you know, turn my love off just because. But so, and I get tickled about, you know, the different things, you know, different culture and how, you know, real they are and honest. Well, anyway, so we moved to Wilmington, North Carolina, and I worked for a battered women's shelter thrift store in the bad side of town, if you know what I mean. And in particular, there were two areas there that were really notorious for drive-by shootings and that type of thing. But this thrift store was located right smack dab in the middle of all that. And I worked there, volunteered actually. I didn't get paid. I volunteered, okay, in this thrift store. And just up the street, not even a block, there was a Boys and Girls Club. Well, my daughter was 5, and she's blonde, white blonde, Southern girl. She was only about 5 years old, hadn't even started school as yet. And I took my daughter up there, and I walked into that facility, and everyone in there were people of color. Now, I don't want to be offensive, I don't, you know, but everybody, the teachers, the little boys, the little girls, it was a Boys and Girls Club. And my daughter was the marshmallow, the only white girl in the whole entire clan of people in that building. Because again, this thrift store was located on the predominantly black side of town. But I didn't have fear in my heart to put my daughter in that environment when it came to the Boys and Girls Club. I figured there's a lot of children in there. Well, first and foremost, they looked at me like, what in the world? But they were polite. They were receptive. The women that were in charge let me enroll her. They acted like everything was fun, everything was normal, everything was good. And my daughter attended that Boys and Girls Club for the entire summer. Well, let me tell you what happened. They ate her up. They played with her hair. They loved on her. They couldn't get enough of my daughter. They braided her hair. They just couldn't get enough of her. They painted her fingernails, and the boys and the girls, they just ate her up. She was like a special treat. And I'll never forget, one day I came home one afternoon with her, and they had braided her hair, the little girls, and there was a school teacher across the street that my daughter Ashley would play with her kids once in a while, and they were all about the same age, about 5, 6, 3, 4, whatever. And I'll never forget, the lady said something to me about letting my daughter go to that Boys and Girls Club because they were going to convert her into being a black girl. And this was a public school teacher who said this to me. Someone who is supposed to embrace all nationalities in her classroom, who is to be inclusive and allowing and accepting and treating everyone with all due respect. I was shocked. I couldn't believe she said that. And it never occurred to me, to be concerned about my daughter mingling with people of color. And especially seeing how I guess I was the only dummy that would even put my daughter in that position. Like I was a retard. If you please excuse me. I don't mean to offend anybody. Let me retract that. But you know what I'm saying. There's a way of saying things like I was lacking something up here. Please excuse me. I didn't mean to use the word that I just said. Because that's another area that I have an issue with. Because I've always been very sympathetic to that situation. But I was just stunned. I was like, what in the world is going on here? Well, the church I attended in Wilmington, the church I attended in Moorhead, the places I went to church, we were a mixed congregation. And when my husband and I pastored a small church, I'll never forget, there was a couple that lived across the street that has a baby, a special needs baby, and they were a couple of color, and they actually came over, and my husband was out front at the church working on the sign, and the guy asked my husband if he would be welcome at our church because he was black. I said, give me black people all day long in church because, first of all, they know how to worship God, okay? Second of all, they know how to give when it comes to monetary support. And thirdly, they have the utmost respect for not only God, but for the pastor and his family, okay? I'll take them any day. I'll take it. I'll take a whole church full any day. Bring it on. And so, of course, they were the first of many that finally did, more people started coming, but they were our first couple. And their baby ended up passing away during the time that they were attending our services, which devastated us. But she did have she had a trachea and she had some health issues, and she passed in the middle of the night in her sleep. But needless to say, for them to have to come and ask us if they'd be welcome, I just couldn't wrap my head around that, So part of what's brought a lot of this on is currently my husband is, one of his best friends is a man of color, and they're very, very good friends with each other, and his wife is mixed. She's black and white, very light complected. She almost looks like she's Spanish, but anyway, this man has gone through, quite a bit, and he lost his first wife. She got sick and she passed, but she loved us. She remembered, when my daughter was little, we used to sit in the pew in front of them, and for some reason she really liked me a lot, and I didn't realize how much she liked me, but she did, and they just, to this very day, they look at my daughter like she's a princess. And of course, she's full grown with 2 children of her own. She's married to a full-blooded Hispanic. I have Lumbee Indian grandchildren. I have a niece and nephew that are black. Actually, I have 2 nephews that are black and 1 niece, because my mom's sisters my one mom's sister adopted two, Tyrus and Denise, and they're black. And then my Aunt Sandra adopted a boy of color, and all of them as babies. And so, you know, we're the only family they know. You know, my aunts, that their mama, and my one aunt, her husband, that's dad, that's daddy, because they were brought in as newborn babies and raised in. So, you know, I've got Lumbee Indian, I've got black and Hispanic, okay, and then a regular Caucasian mix all in my family. And we're talking immediate, like grandkids, nieces and nephews. So what prompted me to come on about this is my husband's friend shared with my husband that someone made the comment, and this is about church, our church that we attend now, that the church was being taken over by, I'm not even going to say Niggers. And the person that supposedly said it, okay, they said it, and then whoever they said it to must have repeated it to my husband's best friend, who's a man of color. Excuse me. And it absolutely floored me that that was said. Now, back in the day, I went to a ladies' retreat one year. And I don't know how or why it all transpired the way it did, but I ended up being with all of my sisters in the church that were black. And, you know, when we went to the ladies' retreat, you know how you share like several cars, you know, like we'll share rides, like 4 women in one car and maybe 5 women in another and 3 in another, and we all follow each other to the designated ladies' retreat area, wherever it is out of town, usually several hours of driving. And I ended up being with my black sisters, and I ended up rooming with my black sisters. And I want you to know that I never had so much fun, so much joy, so much camaraderie, so much respect, because my husband's a minister. I had never had so much of a good time as I did with those sisters. It was unbelievable. I loved it. And they ate me up. I don't know why they ate me up. I'm not anybody special, but they did. They ate me up. I was just like, and I don't know. It's just, and I don't know, when my husband preaches, when he does preach, you know, they just adore him. And I don't know, I've had the girl that I worked with for 3 years, that was a woman of color, used to tell me the reason that people liked me like that is because I was real. I was just myself. I didn't put on, you know, any kind of a facade. And we in our church had foot washing and communion. We believe in doing that. And I remember one year I was in a room with nothing but my black sisters. Again, unplanned. It just happened that way. And it was almost like all the white girls just ran to make sure that they were where all the white girls were at, you know, like all the white sisters. And I ended up in my bubble of oblivion, you know, not paying attention, just loving the moment. I ended up in a room with nothing but a bunch of black sisters, but it never faded. It didn't bother me none. And I think if nothing else, it made an impression on them, but it wasn't on purpose. It wasn't like I deliberated and said, well, I'm going to go to ladies retreat with all my black sisters, and I'm going to do foot washing and communion with all my black sisters. It just ended up that way. And one of my friends in the church, I call her my spiritual sister, is black. I love her to death. And we don't hang out or any of that kind of stuff. But in church, she's my buddy. And she prays for me. I know she does. And she's there for me if I need to cry or if I need to lean on someone, she's there. And I could tell you about a story about my daughter when she was real little. That was one of her teachers, this lady I'm referring to that is my spiritual sister. When Ashley was a little girl, she was getting ready to move up to another Sunday school class because she had had her birthday, and they put them in the class based on age. And I remember I was at the church doing some kind of something, work or something, and all of a sudden I couldn't see my daughter, and I tried to find her, and I found her in this lady's classroom. That was her teacher, the one that's a woman of color, my spiritual sister. Ashley was sitting there, and her shoulders were heaving up and down like that, and I came around to look at her face, and she was crying. And I said, Ashley, first of all, I said, you scared me because I couldn't find you, honey. What's wrong? And she was crying, and she said she didn't want to go to another classroom, that she wanted to stay with, and I won't say the sister's name, but that she said she wanted to stay in that classroom. She didn't want to go to a different classroom because she loved her teacher, who was a woman of color. And she was so young that when we would be out in town and stuff, she would, every black woman she saw, that's Sister So-and-so, Mommy, look, that's Sister So-and-so. I had to teach her not every black woman out in the street, out in the world, out in the store, out at Walmart, whatever, was not her Sunday school teacher. But that's how much she loved her Sunday school teacher. But this business of the comment that was made just recently, okay, we're talking about like not even a week ago, I don't know, just, it bothered me. I couldn't sleep. It just kept playing over and over and over in my mind, and I thought, this is ridiculous. Who would even dare to say something like that, especially if you're a Christian? Because in the Bible, for one, Jesus wasn't even white. Jesus was not black. He was a Jew. He was Jewish. And, in that country like Ethiopia and places like that, the disciples, they catered to all nationalities. And there was never any question, about color. And there is no place for that in the church. There is no place for racism. There is no place for prejudice. There is no place for any of that. That is supposed to be washed under the blood. It's to classify someone in a detrimental fashion because of their race or their color or their culture. When I was born, I didn't ask to be born white. And like I told my husband, he's from German descent. Well, when he was born, he didn't ask to have German descent. I didn't ask to have Cherokee Indian descent, which the Cherokees were downgraded as well as women. Women were downgraded. We weren't allowed to vote at a certain time in our history. We weren't considered viable in any way, shape, or form when it came to the government and the structure of society. We had to fight to get where we're at today. Even though it was wrong for us to be in that mode, we had to fight. The Chinese had to fight to be accepted. The Irish had to fight. I mean, there are a lot of nationalities in history that were persecuted and looked down on. And my heritage on my dad's side is Cherokee Indian, and they were trash compared, in the eyes of many. But when it comes to God, when it comes to living for God, when it comes to receiving Him into our lives, you know, there should not be a barrier, especially towards those that are of like-minded, those that are in church, that are, we're all supposed to be related through Christ. You know what I mean? And yes, there's different cultures and there's different lifestyles, but there should be a sense of respect. And being ethnocentric, my husband and I were talking about, he said egocentric, but ethnocentric is like my way is the best way. If they don't do it like I do it, then it's wrong. And xenocentric is where you feel like everybody else is right and you're wrong. But it shouldn't be that way, in the house of God. We're created equal. It's the heart. It's the heart that is of cruciality, And I know our world is not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. And there's always going to be racial division, and there's always going to be cultural division. But what I'm saying is, someone who has the Holy Ghost, or someone who claims to be a Christian, their upmanship should not, well, for one, there shouldn't be any upmanship. I'm not better than Joe Blow down the street just because I'm a Christian. We're all created equal in the eyes of God. He is no respecter of persons. And for someone in the church that knows better, especially someone that's been in church for a long time, and especially someone who attends a church that is multicultural and interracial, we have a bunch of interracial in our church. And it is devastating to me that someone would snide a certain race and say something as derogatory as to call them Niggers. I won't even say it, because to me it's in the same category as FU, you know what. It's just a bad word. It's a very bad word. And if I ever heard a Christian, so-called Christian, say something like that in my presence, if I heard something like that in my presence, I would definitely be outspoken on that issue. And I'm not better because I don't feel inclined to feel like I'm better because I'm white or whatever. I didn't ask to be born white. I could have been born black, and those that were born black didn't ask to be born black. It is what it is. It's just, my conception was between two Caucasian, and who's to say that I could have been mixed? But you cannot lay claim to certain issues regarding, like, if you can sing, for example, that's a gift from God. To be able to sing is not something it's a hobby that you just picked up out of nowhere and all of a sudden you can sing real good. Singing is a gift. It's from God. And it's not to be lorded over other people. Oh, I can sing, and I'm seen by everybody in the congregation. I'm special. I'm above, Or if you can play a musical instrument, does not make you better than someone who can't play a musical instrument. We all have something to offer. But when it comes to laying claim to being better based on our skin color and based on our cultural factors, and to be judged by the same, that's wrong. It's totally wrong. There's no room for it in the church. There's tons of scripture in the Bible which I wanted to quote, but I'm not, like I said, I don't want to get fanatical crazy and make people think, oh my God, she's gone off the deep end. But there is no place for prejudice or racism in the church. It does not belong there. I have got 2 Lumbee Indian grandchildren, okay, that one of which both could, but the one is taking advantage of my grandson, who's Lumbee Indian. Okay, he's half white, half Lumbee. and he gets to go to college for free because of his nationality. Well, the Lumbee Indian people have finally been recognized as authentically, the Indian culture, Indian whatever, and legislated. So they are part of the Indian, thing, and they can go to college for free. But if you look at their history, what the issue was, they are a multitude of Indian and black. They have black in them. They have people of color in their bloodline. So they're a mix, but they have now regarded them in favorable, light to be acclimated with the rest of the, like Cherokee and what other type of Indian there are, that they get special privileges due to their nationality. Now that's society doing that, but what I'm saying is I've got 2 Hispanic grandchildren. Their mom's white and their dad's full-blooded Hispanic. Just like the Lumbee Indian. The dad's white and she was full-blooded Lumbee Indian. And then I've got 2 nephews and a niece that are of color. Okay, and I have Cherokee Indian in me, and my father shared with me if I had a certain percentage, I could go to college for free. On my mom's side, she's full-blooded Canadian French. So, come on. It's a melting pot. And my main point in saying all this is we have to embrace all nationalities. We don't have to agree with, certain factors. But I'm talking about things like, I don't know, I can't explain it, but it's like, to me, every culture is very interesting. I have some friends that are Chinese, and I've enjoyed learning about their culture, and I find it interesting, and I can love them just as readily as I can someone who's white or whatever. I just think it's really sad. And even, I do collect reborns, not getting off the subject here, but I have a little reborn with me today that I brought to my daughter's house, which I'm hoping she's going to come home soon. But let me show you this baby. This is Kendall Marie. This is Kendall Marie. All right, that's my daughter. So you guys have a good one, and I hope that this video was enlightening and not offensive. And this hopefully will help you get to know me a little bit better as a person. Have a great day. Bye.